Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be going through what's in my spring basket. So I think there was also a tag that Candy put out about decks to read with for spring. And so this is going to be a little bit of a mini deck collection as well as a I guess sort of VR to Candy and participation in that tag as well, because these are the decks that I do try to work with in the springtime. I may not hit all of them in a year, but I always like to try to work with these decks. These are the decks that primarily tend to hang out in this sort of spring seasonally inspired basket pretty much all the time. So I thought we would just go through them, especially because not too long ago I did a whole spring cleaning of my office. And this is, for right now, what's in the basket is just all tarot decks. We'll see how long this video is to see if I include any Oracle. But Oracle for me is a little more multifunctional and less seasonally driven. So when it comes to seasonal decks, I tend to think more of tarot. And I definitely have tarot decks that feel like they fit more in a specific season or another. Although I do have decks that are multi-purpose and decks that I will use in any given season just because I love them. Okay, so let's jump in with some of my favorite sort of spring decks. This one is my Mystic Fairy Tarot, and I have edged mine. This is like, it's one of my favorite fairy decks. Like, I love the guidebook that Barbara Moore wrote. I love the story. The progression of this deck is amazing. It goes through a little story in the Minor Arcana, which I really, really appreciate. There's a little bit of a numerological approach to this deck as well, which again, I really appreciate, but it also does align really well with the Rider-Waite-Smith system. I think it's just a beautiful spring energy deck. I have a couple of Oracle decks that kind of exist in this same sort of art style as well that I would probably consider more of an energy that I would work with in spring. But as far as like decks that I definitely want to try to work with during the spring season, this is always one of them. It's a great little reader and I really enjoy the messages. I love the yellow color palette. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a yellow person, but like this yellow color palette just it just screams spring to me. So I really, really love working with it. Particularly when it's like really early spring. I feel like this is a great early spring deck where we're just like, things are just now starting to bloom. This has such a fantastic energy for that kind of a work. So I definitely like to use it in the springtime. Another deck that I do like to use a lot in the springtime, but does also tap into that kind of, I will pull this deck out anytime kind of an energy. And this is my Dreaming Way Tarot. Now I do have two copies of this deck. My trimmed version is currently in storage, and the one that I have out and have been working with is this back to the sort of original with the white borders and everything. This deck is like one of my top decks. It's such a fantastic reader. And it's so funny because I hear other people talk about this deck as being very wintry in the energy. And I could see that too. But there's something about this color palette that feels very early spring in the Pacific Northwest, because it's still quite gray here a lot of the time in springtime. It doesn't feel particularly lush or rich or anything. Like, it rains a lot, it's gloomy a lot of the time. So I think that's probably why I associate this one with spring. And it's such a solid reader for me. This is one of those decks that I could pull out and read for absolutely anything, and it would just give me exactly what I need to know. I love the sort of interesting fashion that happens in this deck. Like, I don't really know how to explain it. It's just the people are really interesting. There's a lot of gender fluidity in this deck as well, which I think is really cool. And again, yeah, it's just beautiful depictions, beautiful artwork. I love the way it reads. But again, it does feel like a very like early springtime energy. But again, it's one that I will use any time of the year and really do use any time of the year. It's always pretty close at hand for me. Here's the backs, which are not really my favorite, but you know. So another spring favorite for me is in this funky little bag that I made a long time ago. And that is my Paulina Tarot? Yeah, just a Paulina Tarot. Here's the backs of this. And again, this is another deck that I really do associate with the springtime, particularly here in the Pacific Northwest, because it's a very moody deck. It's very kind of gray and almost like overcast in a sense, but it's a wonderful reader. It doesn't give me gloomy readings. I love the way it reads. It has a really wonderful, unique energy. I love the world that Paulina, I think it's Paulina Faye now, that she creates. I have a couple of her decks, and this one is just, it's been a long time favorite in my collection. I use it just about every spring. It lives in the spring basket, so it's definitely one that I want to try to get to at least to spend a little bit of time with every single spring. But again, it definitely feels like really late winter, early spring energy for me, because like things are kind of starting to bloom a little bit, but it's still quite gloomy and gray. And I don't know, this deck just has a little bit of an overcast in terms of the artwork, but it doesn't read that way, if that makes sense. Like, it reads really well for me. I get really wonderful, succinct readings with it, but it's just the sort of color palette and art style that feels very, I don't know, Pacific Northwest to me. It's kind of gray. It's kind of gloomy, like in a lot of the cards, but occasionally, like, you get those pops. You get those pops of color, those little pops of sunshine, and I think it really does kind of remind me of home in that way. So my other Paulina Faye deck, or Paulina Cassidy, I think is the name on this particular one, is the I cannot remember the name of this deck. The Joie de Vivre Tarot. This one, differently than the one that we just looked at, even though it kind of has the same artwork and kind of exists in the same world, has a completely different energy. I love this Queen of Swords. Like, the look on her face is amazing. This deck for me feels more in the late spring. We're getting into summer, like it's getting warm. Everybody's getting antsy to get outside and play and explore. It's fun, it's whimsical, and it reads completely differently for me than the Paulina Tarot. This is often the deck that I go to when I want like a happy reading, or honestly, it's like when I'm in a bad mood, I will pull this deck out because it will make me happy. It is just kind of joy in a deck. I have lots of decks that like make me happy, but this one is like particularly good for when I'm feeling a little bit melancholy. So this is one that I do often pull out when winter just feels like it's dragging on so long. And like technically it's spring. We've had the spring equinox, Star and all of that. Easter for those who celebrate that. Like, that's all happened, but it's still like dark and gloomy and cold and rainy here. And sometimes I will pull this deck out to just give me that little pop of sunshine, that little pop of color. That little pop of joy that just kind of helps me get through those long, gloomy days. And it's such a fun reader. I really enjoy working with it. It brings me a lot of joy and a lot of happiness. And for the most part, like it gives me really good readings too. So I love this one. I definitely like to pull it out when we're getting kind of into the late spring, really kind of early summer kind of energy. And the backs are beautiful too. So another deck that's in my spring basket, but I do use during other times of the year, is the Kai Love Tarot. This deck for me, here's the backs. This is an indie deck. I think everything we've looked at so far has been mass market, so this is the first indie deck. I love the colors in this. I love the artwork. I love the way that this deck has envisioned the tarot. It kind of exists in the same sort of space as maybe the Margaret Peterson for me, but this would be like the lighter half of the year type of abstract art deck that I would go to. And the Margaret Peterson would be the one, like its counterpart in the darker half of the year. So in addition to my decks being like seasonally based, I also have light and dark. So on the one side of my office is my spring and summer decks, which are my decks I use for those seasons, as well as decks that have that lighter side of the year energy. And then on the other side of my office is my fall and winter decks, as well as decks that sit into that space of the darker half of the year, which technically probably lasts longer than a half a year here in the Pacific Northwest. But I love this deck. It reads so well. It's such a beautiful, intuitive reader. And again, I use it a lot in the same way that I use the Margaret Peterson, where I am just kind of tapping into the intuitive work that comes out of working with these images. I just think they're amazing. I really love what the creator's done. I think I have a whole walkthrough on this deck in particular, so I'll try to remember to link that for you below if you haven't seen it yet. But it's such a beautiful one. Again, sitting kind of in that same space of that like abstract art that I like almost feel on a visceral level. But this is the one that I use in the lighter half of the year during the spring and summer months. So some of these are a little bit crossover, but if I had to pick like a season for this deck, it would definitely be spring. It is like the new growth that comes out of that darkness, right? It's beautiful. I love it. So another indie deck that is a longtime spring favorite for me is the Forager's Daughter Tarot. I think this might be the first edition. I know there is another edition, I think called the Afterlight edition or something like that. Here's the backs. This is one of the few decks that I've left the gilding because this rose gold gilding is beautiful and it is super soft and luxurious and I love it. This is a animal pip deck for the most part. And it's beautiful. I get so much out of working with this deck, and I don't really go for animal decks, but for whatever reason, this one just really hits the mark for me. I love that I can read it really elementally and numerologically, which is really my favorite way to read when I have the opportunity to do that. The guidebook that comes with this deck is also really fantastic. So while I don't need the guidebook, I definitely like to get into it and work with it and see what the creator has to say about these cards. I love that we have animals and that we have the pip style of the cards, the pip nature of the cards. And it's just one of those that it's such a clear reader for me. But it's also one that has really deep and meaningful readings. It's not one that I use a ton, but I definitely like to use it during the springtime. It has that great kind of energy for me. I have used it a lot for the last several years during the springtime. So when I say it's not one I use a lot, I'm meaning it's not one that I tend to use year round. This tends to be more of a spring specific deck for me, but I will use it quite a bit during the springtime. So this is another deck that has a bit of a spring energy for me. This is the True Heart Intuitive Tarot. I really don't like the cardstock and I have trimmed mine and edged it, but I really do like what's been done with this deck. And I feel like the colors that sort of almost not pastel. It's not pastel. Cannot think of the right color tone or language to use, but it just has with those, all the blues and the pinks and the purples, it just feels very much in the springtime for me. I don't read with this one that often, but it is a very clear reader and I really enjoy the readings that I've had when I have worked with it. It's definitely a Rider-Waite-Smith based deck, but it does have some openness in terms of reading a little bit more numerologically if you want. Here's a good example, the Four of Discs. So we don't see a figure that's necessarily hoarding his discs. He could be just, kind of gathering the resources that he needs. And I love that because that's kind of how I read the Four of Pentacles. So it works really well in that way. I think it's beautiful. It doesn't have much in the way of age or body diversity, but we do get some nice cultural diversity. So that's really fantastic. The backs are not my favorite and I have trimmed mine and the cardstock is kind of atrocious, but I really do enjoy working with this deck in the springtime. It's just got a really nice kind of crystal clear sort of energy that just feels a little bit like an easy reader. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's just like, man, I can throw these cards down and I can get a reading and move on with my day. And it doesn't have to be like a huge ordeal, right? Sometimes you just need the message and you need it just crystal clear, and here it is, and there you go, and that's what this deck does for me. So another mass market deck that I actually rehomed and then repurchased is the Line Strider Tarot. So this was back in my trying to, I don't know, got caught up in the purge mentality and got rid of this deck, and then was very, very sorry that I did. I mean, it went to a great home, so I'm not sorry in that respect, but like, it's one that I was like, I shouldn't have gotten rid of that because I really love this deck. This deck to me feels very spring, very clear, very air suit, like air and water mixed together. I don't know if that makes sense, but I love the white space on this. I love this simple images, and by simple, I don't mean like juvenile or anything like that. It's beautiful illustrative work, but it's really clear. And it's one of those decks that like I feel like I can use for just any type of a reading. And I always get a really clear, very succinct message. It's just, again, it's a really, really solid reader that I don't really have to struggle with. And I love the white space because it gives lots and lots of breathing room. So I feel like this is a deck that I could use a lot of cards with because there would be plenty of space for me to have that message kind of pull together. It doesn't feel like overwhelming at all. It's very kind of succinct and to the point. I really, really enjoy that about it. So again, another really beautiful one that I definitely like to pull out really in winter, the sort of end of winter, beginning of spring, because all the white does feel very much like that cool sort of winter energy, but then we have that pops of color in the center, which feel like the spring, that new growth coming through, which I think is really, really cool. So another indie deck that I have mentioned many times on my channel, this is the Textured Tarot. Here's the backs, which are lovely. The cardstock is, like, it feels really nice in the hand, but it is like atrocious to work with because you cannot riffle shuffle this deck or you will ruin it. This deck for me feels very much, again, like in that beginning time of spring because it's kind of dark and it's a little grungy, but then we do have these like beautiful bright yellows and blues that feel like, yeah, like you're rejoicing that spring is coming, right? You're gonna get out of the dark, gloomy times and into the beautiful sunny days and the warmer weather, and I just feel like this is just an amazing deck for that. I also just absolutely adore this deck. I adore the way it reads. I just don't like the cardstock, but like this is one of those decks that I deal with it because it's such a fantastic deck. So it does, however, live in my spring basket because it is one that I tend to use during the first few bits of spring primarily. However, this is a deck that I would use any time of year for any sort of reading as well. Gorgeous deck. I keep hoping that this creator will release it on another cardstock, just something that's a little bit easier to shuffle would be fantastic. And, you know, create another deck because I absolutely love this creator's work. Okay, so another deck that lives in my spring basket because it feels very spring to me, but I use all the time, any time of the year, is I think this is called the Tarot of Light now. It was formerly the Art of Love Tarot. I adore this deck. I adore the keywords, the associations. I love the artwork. This is one of those decks that I have used and abused for years. This is actually my second copy of it because I wanted the new copy on the matte cardstock, and I gifted my other copy, which I had trimmed down, to a friend. So I'm so glad to have this deck. I really, really love working with it. I use it a lot for transition reading. So when I'm going from one sort of state of being to another, because like the keywords are just, I don't know, they're just perfect for that. So it gets a lot of use in my collection. But it does feel very spring. It's like those pastel borders and, you know, the sort of pastel-y, soft, angelic sort of imagery. This is artwork by Toni Carmine Salerno, and it was curated, and the guidebook was written by Denise Jarvie, and like she did an amazing job with this. I think I've rehomed every other Toni Carmine Salerno deck that I have ever had because when I want that artwork, this is the deck that I go to. It's ingrained in my brain now that this is the deck and the artwork that I need for that kind of an energy, and it just works beautifully. And I really love the keywords. Like it just, I tend to not be a huge keyword person on decks, but like in this deck, it really, really works for me. I may yet still trim it down again like I did before, just taking off the two sides and leaving the titles at the bottom, but I haven't done that as of yet. And it hasn't stopped me from using the deck at all. It's just something that, you know, I might get around to at some point. But this is definitely a favorite and one that I use for a lot of different readings, but it does feel like it has a spring energy. And so that is where it lives, is in my spring basket. Okay, another deck that it gets moved around, let's be honest. Sometimes this lives in my winter basket and sometimes it lives in my spring basket. And this is the Wandering Star Tarot. I have modified mine, so I've trimmed it down and I've edged it in multiple colors. I really love this deck. It is like, again, such a super clear, easy reader that I'm just like, yep, I get it. Thank you. I know what you're trying to tell me. And it's such a great deck for people who are new to tarot because there are keywords on the card. It definitely leans Rider-Waite-Smith, but there are keywords on the card, and I love that they are worked into the artwork. So it's really easy to ignore them if you want to, but they are there if you'd like to access them. So like some of them don't always align for me. So like Ace of Wands, career, and travel. I mean, career maybe, travel, no, that's not a keyword I associate with the Ace of Wands. Beginnings, sure, because it's an ace, right? So sometimes they're a little hit or miss, but like the Magician with power, action, skill, power's on there twice, action's on there twice too. I never noticed that. Some of them really, really work. And some of them are like, yeah, maybe, maybe not. But the great thing is because they're just kind of worked in there, like it's really, really easy for me to just ignore them when they don't align with my own reading style. And sometimes, you know, it's good to work with a deck that kind of does something a little bit different because it kind of gets you out of your own box, right? Where you like spend all your time just reading decks in a certain way. That sometimes I like to pull a deck like this out and actually look at the keywords and use that to help me create my message for my reading, because it gets me out of my sort of rut of reading in the same old way every time, right? So sometimes I pull out a deck like this to specifically read with it and use those keywords to be like, okay, maybe, you know, defense isn't a keyword that I would use to work with the Five of Wands, but let me see if I use that keyword, you know, how does that shift my perspective on this reading, this card in the context of the reading that I'm currently doing. So I think it's really fun for that. It's a great way for me to just kind of shift my own thinking here and there. It's also just a super clear and easy reader. I really love the sort of folk artwork in it. It's just fantastic. And yeah, it's definitely one that like I usually recommend to people who are newer to tarot because the guidebook's pretty good, but it's really just those keywords on it that really make it a really good one to work with and to learn from, because it's giving you hints on the card, right? So that's really fantastic. Let's talk about a couple of newer decks in my collection that I've now homed in my spring basket. This is the Oh That French deck, the Tarot of the Strange Antlers or Branches or something like that. This is an absolute beautiful deck. Love the backs. I have edged my copy in green to match the backs. This is a absolutely gorgeous deck. It has, for me, it has a very intuitive energy, and that's partially because like I can't read the guidebook. I mean, I could Google translate it, but for the most part, this deck is very clear about what is being depicted, and it's really easy to work with even if you can't read the titles. Although you work with it enough, you'll get to know what these words are. Of course, you can also just look them up. But I really love this deck. It's got such a unique sort of energy to it. It's got a sort of unique voice. It is very gentle, very supportive. I work with it very intuitively. just kind of going off what I see in the imagery, letting my own tarot knowledge create the foundation for the message, adding that intuitive layer for what the artwork is bringing out, you know, what it's making me think of, what it's making me feel, how I'm relating to it. And in that sense, like, it just works beautifully as an intuitive reader. And the fact that I'm completely, you know, pulled out of the world by it being in a different language is not necessarily a bad thing, because then that allows me to read it in a way that resonates with my own sort of view and my own intuitive understanding of these cards. So it's a great way to kind of flex your intuitive muscles to work with a deck where, like, you can't rely on the guidebook. Again, it's a tarot, so the tarot structure, that 78 card structure, is here and it is inherent in the deck. So you always have that as a foundation, but without having that guidebook to kind of hone in on and tap into, you're kind of just left to your own intuitive devices. And so it's really cool, I think, because it really encourages you to flex those muscles and to really look at, you know, how's this card making me feel? What does it make me think of? And what does it mean in relation to the other cards that I've drawn around it, or the reading that I'm doing, or the spread that I'm using? So it's a really wonderful deck for that. And like, the artwork is just stunning. I love it. Love it. So another fairly new or newer deck in my spring basket is the Heavenly Bloom Tarot deck. I did show this in my decks that make my gamer heart happy video, because this deck makes me think of the Final Fantasy world. Here's the beautiful backs. I am working with this deck currently this spring. It is rose gold gilded or pink gilded. I'm on the fence about whether or not that gilding is going to stay, because it is a little bit sharp and I don't really like it, like tactilely, like it catches. I can catch my finger on it. So it might have to go. It's beautiful, but it might have to go, because a deck has to be able to work for me. It can only be just pretty if I'm not intending to work with it, which is totally fine, because I have decks like that too. But this is a deck that I do work with and I want to continue to work with this spring, and so the gilding might go. I love this deck. This deck just, it brings me so much joy. It definitely feels like spring in a deck though. It feels like that that first really warm sunny day that you get in springtime. Like when it comes out, the sun comes out finally after, you know, the long months of winter, and you're just kind of basking in that glow and that feel where you get when you have, like, all of a sudden, like, you're energized and you're excited and you're inspired. That is what this deck is for me. It's such a great reader too. I'm really, really enjoying working with it. I'll be speaking about it more in my monthly wrap up, my monthly deck review at the end of April, because it is a deck that I'm currently working with. But it's just, oh, it's such a great energy. I love working with it. And again, it's like one of those decks that just, it makes me happy every time I get it out. It reads really, really well for me. I love that each of the suits kind of have like their own sort of clan, if you read the little guidebook, which is fantastic. And yeah, it's just a great reader. I really, really enjoy it. But again, it's a deck that just, oh, it feels like that first warm day where you're like, yes, here comes the sun. I'm going to sit out in the beautiful sunshine and feel the warmth on my skin. That is what this deck does. And it's just, it's so wonderful. I love it. Okay, so another new deck that has made its way into my spring basket. And I can't remember if I showed this deck in a video or if that was just hanging out chatting with my members. But this is the Greek Goddess Tarot. This is a indie deck. The last one we looked at was mass market. Here's the beautiful backs. Oh yeah, that's right. I showed this in my creator collection video. So I have not worked with this deck, but I am really looking forward to working with it this spring. So again, definitely in that to be worked with pile. I think I talked about how, like, I felt like I almost have a Ellen Lorenzi Prince deck for every season. And this deck, oh my goodness. It feels like spring in a deck. I absolutely love the artwork. I love the colors. It just has such a great energy to it. Totally different than her other decks though, which is fantastic, because I was a little bit worried that, you know, when you collect decks by a certain creator, you know, sometimes they can feel a little bit the same because it's, you know, the same creator creating the same type of artwork. But Ellen Lorenzi Prince does such a great job of creating decks that exist in their own space, even though the artwork is completely cohesive across all of her decks. It's the same art style, which I absolutely love. I don't know what it is about it. There's just something about her artwork that just speaks to me on this really deep level. Like it just like reaches right in and like grabs a hold of my heart, like in the best possible way. I love it. But it has a totally different and unique energy than the other decks that I have by this creator. And I do believe I have them all. So I'm really, really excited to work with this one this spring. It's definitely on my to be worked with list for sure. But it is also one that is currently residing in my spring basket because I feel like that is definitely the energy that this deck will hold for me. So another really new deck to add to this basket is the Tarot of Tales, and I do not think I've shown this one publicly, although I did do an unboxing with my members. This deck is really, really new. I haven't worked with it yet, and that's because I'm saving it for the monthly medicine practice for May. Here's the beautiful backs, but like just look at those colors. Those look like spring colors to me. This deck, because of the like black borders and everything, could feel a little bit dark and heavy as well. Like I feel like it could tap into maybe a really early winter energy as well, but it just, I don't know, something about the pastel colors. It speaks to me of that transition period between winter and spring. Again, probably based on where I live and the type of environment that I'm exposed to. I absolutely adore the artwork in this, and I am so excited to work with it in May. It's not a deck I have worked with at all because, again, I'm holding onto it for a specific purpose, for a specific practice that we're going to be doing in the monthly medicine, which is working with fairy tales. So I feel like this deck is going to be absolutely fantastic for that. But it's so beautiful. I love the artwork. I have seen this deck trimmed where people have taken the black border off. I, at this point, don't think I'm going to do that. I really like it the way it is. I will probably edge it because I feel like it needs to be edged. But as of right now, I'm keeping it the way it is, and I cannot wait to work with it. But it's taking up residence in my spring basket because that's the sort of energy that it has out the gate. Now, it may move later on as I work with it. Sometimes decks shift and change for me, and they'll go from one basket to another because they take on a different energy, or if I use them for different works, sometimes that will shift my experience with a deck, and so it'll move from one home to another. It's all in my office, so it doesn't really matter, right? Another deck that usually lives in my spring basket, but I currently have out right this 5 minutes, is the White Newman Tarot. And oh my goodness, this deck is so much fun. I adore this deck. I also showed this deck in my gamer decks video collection because this deck feels like every video game I've ever played. It's a little Final Fantasy, it's a little Zelda, it's a little, oh my goodness, I can't even think of all the video games. I absolutely adore the way this deck reads. It's got such a great energy. Oh, Animal Crossing, I know I mentioned that one. It's got such a great energy. It's got a little bit of a sense of humor too, which I really appreciate. There is a particular reading that I do, or really kind of a play experience that I do with this and the Deck of Many Fates and Things, which is just, it's so much fun. I really, really enjoy that work with it. But I do actually use it for serious practices and serious readings as well. There's just something about it, again, that just really speaks to me. I love the artwork. I love the way it reads. I love the messages that it gives me. I love that I can use it for that play aspect as well as, more serious readings, because I can do serious work with this deck, which I appreciate. It's a deck that lives in my spring basket because of the colors. Like, again, I feel like this is more like late spring transitioning into summertime, and so it sits in that energy for me, but this is a deck that I will pull out anytime and use for like any sort of reading, as well as those sort of specific practices and readings that I do working with this deck. Okay, I'm going to pull 3 additional decks into this. They do not live in my actual spring basket, but they live spring basket adjacent, and I would consider them spring decks. They just kind of have sort of places of honor, I guess, on my shelf. So they sit near it, but out where I can see them. This is the Fairytale Tarot by Baba Studios. Here's the beautiful backs. This deck was very generously gifted to me from like a really beautiful friend. And for me, it has so much meaning and significance because of that. But it is also that sort of fairy tale energy, which clearly I guess I associate with spring and summer in this sort of color palette and colorway, whereas some of the other decks that I have, like the Rackham and the John Bauer, also feel like fairy tale decks, but they feel like fairy tale decks that exist in the fall and winter sort of energy. This deck, I do apologize, is out of print, but oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. I really enjoy working with it. I love the fairy tale associations, and again, it has that spring summer energy, maybe late spring into early summer, because it feels like it has a lot of joy and kind of like a golden. Can you say gold is a feeling? Golden is not a feeling, but there's not, I'm trying to express, again, as I've said a million times on my channel, I'm trying to verbalize a felt experience, which is not always my forte. This deck feels like gold and I really love it. Again, if it does feel more in the late spring to early summer, and so that then tends to be when I use it, but it's such a favorite. I love it. And part of that is also the personal associations that I have with this deck and with the person that gave it to me. So it's definitely a treasure in my collection. Another deck that I think is currently out of print is the Victorian Romantic Tarot, and this is 100% a spring deck for me. I will use this deck year round though, because I do often use it for full moon readings. Here's the beautiful backs. I forget which edition I have. I think it may be the 3rd. It doesn't say right off the bat, and I'm not going to look that far for it. So again, this one has the cold foil stamping. This deck to me is spring in a deck. It is everything beautiful and romantic that spring invites. It has a very Venusian energy as well. And so it really exists in that space. Again, if it didn't live in a particular place of honor, it would live in the spring basket. But because it's also a deck that I use year round, and I tend to pull out a lot during the full moon, because the full moon is an energy that's quite difficult for me. I find it to be really overwhelming. So I tend to go to decks that really feel like they're very loving and supportive. And this deck just does that for me beautifully. I hear it's a wonderful reader for romance readings, but I don't do those because I don't read for others, and I've been married for a very long time. So I don't really do romantic readings. But I could see where this deck would work really well for that. But oh my goodness, like look at this Empress. This is spring. This is just everything that is beautiful and romantic and soft and wonderful about spring in a card. And the sun, like seriously. It's so beautiful. I love it. So the last deck, I think this is the last deck I'm going to share with you today, is the Terra Muha. And this is a deck that I had previously and rehomed. And again, I mean, I'll say I was sorry that I did it, but not because it went to a lovely home. But like I shouldn't have rehomed it. Here's the beautiful backs. I really, really love this deck. I don't use it a ton, but it definitely comes out in the spring and sometimes the summer. It's very much a Rider-Waite-Smith deck. The guidebook for this is fantastic. I love the guidebook for this deck. But it has such a beautiful, again, romantic kind of Venusian energy to it. And now after doing the Deccan thing, it feels very Aries 3 energy, because like it has a lot of fire and it has some Emperor energy to it, but it also has a lot of the Empress energy. So a lot of the sort of Mars and Venus coming together in this deck. And I don't know, it's just really cool. It's just something that I've noticed after, you know, doing the Deccan Walker or being involved in that I can really pick up that energy really strongly in this deck. Because it does feel very much in those two elements balanced together. And the third decan is like the marriage of the Emperor and Empress. It's like that Four of Wands energy celebrating their union. And I feel like this deck like does that beautifully. Like it is the celebration of the Emperor and the Empress together, their union, and the divine world that they create. So there you go. That is a look at all of the tarot decks that I associate with spring. Now, again, like I said at the beginning of this video, I did not include Oracle because Oracle for me really isn't that seasonally based. And I've really come to understand that about myself in my practice. I have more oracles that exist in the light and dark for me. So I think I showed that in my spring cleaning video where I showed little clips from my shelves that I had arranged. And you'll see that one has a stack of oracle decks on one side and a stack of oracle decks on the other. I do also have baskets of oracle decks, but they do exist in decks that I use primarily in the light time of the year, the light half of the year, and decks that I use in the dark half of the year. However, Oracle for me is usually a complement to tarot, so I will just pull whatever Oracle deck feels like it fits the energy of the deck that I'm currently working with. So it's not necessarily seasonally based, it's more based on what tarot deck I'm using and what I'm using it for. So for that reason, I did not include Oracle in this video. Also, we'd be here forever if I started pulling out all of my lighter half of the year Oracle decks, and it would be a really long video. I hope you enjoyed this look at the decks that are in my spring basket and or spring basket adjacent. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box below. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.